No celebration, he said without looking at me. That was the moment something inside my chest went quiet. Not shattered, not screamed, just stopped, like a clock that had been ticking faithfully for years and finally decided it was tired. The kitchen smelled like cardamom tea and the faint sweetness of the cake I had ordered the night before. I had woken up early, even though I barely slept, smoothing my hair in the mirror like a girl half my age. I told myself it was silly to be nervous after all these years of marriage, but this day felt important to me, sacred even. I wanted it to be marked, remembered. He stood by the counter, jacket half on, checking his phone. The screen glowed against his face, lighting it in a way that made him look like a stranger. When I reached for his sleeve, my fingers brushed something stiff inside his pocket. He flinched, barely noticeable, but enough. "No celebration," he repeated, this time sharper. "I'm late." Late for what? He didn't say. I watched him leave, the door closing with a soft, practiced click. No slam, no argument, just silence settling into the room like dust. At the time, I didn't know that in his pocket lay the reason my love for him would die quietly, and the reason I would learn how revenge doesn't always need to be loud to be devastating. Before that day, my life looked ordinary from the outside, ordinary in the way people trust, ordinary in the way women build entire worlds around a man and call it stability. We had been married for 17 years. 17 years of shared grocery lists, mismatched mugs, arguments over the air conditioner, and Sunday afternoons that smelled like fried onions and laundry detergent. He wasn't cruel. That's what made it harder. He was attentive and public, respectable, the kind of husband people nodded at approvingly. "Your wife is lucky," they'd say. And I would smile, because smiling was easier than explaining the small emptiness that had lived in our home for a while. I worked part-time at a local school office. I liked the rhythm of it, the bells, the children's voices echoing down the halls, the hum of routine. He worked in logistics, long hours, frequent meetings, or at least that's what he told me. We didn't have children, not by choice, not exactly. Life just kept postponing us until the idea became too heavy to lift. Instead, we filled our days with structure. I kept the house warm, he kept the world outside at bay, or so I thought. That morning, the one with the cake and the tea, was our anniversary. Not a round number, not something grand, but it mattered to me. It marked survival. It marked staying. I had suggested a small dinner, just us, maybe candles, maybe a walk after. He'd nodded the night before, distracted but agreeable. I'd gone to bed holding that nod like a promise. When he said no celebration, something shifted, but I told myself not to read too much into it. I'd spent years learning that skill, shrinking my questions, folding my disappointment neatly away. I cleaned up the untouched tea. I covered the cake and slid it into the fridge. The plastic wrap crinkled loudly in the quiet kitchen, and I remember thinking how strange it was that a sound so small could feel so accusing. All day, my phone stayed silent. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the way I kept replaying the way he'd flinched when I touched his pocket, the way his hand had instinctively moved there, protective, as if guarding something fragile or forbidden. I told myself I was imagining things. I had a habit of doing that, doubting my own instincts until they grew quiet too. That evening, he came home late, later than usual. His shirt smelled faintly of a perfume that wasn't mine, something floral, too sweet to be accidental. He brushed past me with a quick kiss on the cheek, already halfway to the bedroom. "I'm exhausted. Let's talk tomorrow." Tomorrow, another word that started to feel hollow. While he showered, I folded laundry. It was mindless work, comforting in its repetition. His clothes were heavy in my hands, familiar. When I reached into his jacket pocket to check for tissues, he always forgot them. I felt it again. Paper. Folded thick, deliberate. My heart didn't race. That came later. In that moment, I felt oddly calm, like my body knew something my mind was still resisting. I pulled it out slowly. It was a receipt, a hotel receipt. My name wasn't on it. Another woman's was. The date was circled in pen, today's date. For a long moment, I just stood there, the sound of water running in the bathroom, the receipt trembling between my fingers. I remember noticing the way the ink had smudged slightly, like someone had pressed too hard while writing, like the decision itself had weight. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I folded it back the way I found it and slid it into my own pocket instead. When he came out of the bathroom, towel around his waist, humming softly, I looked at him and realized something with terrifying clarity. This wasn't a mistake. This was a life he'd been living parallel to mine. And in that moment, standing in our bedroom with the hum of the ceiling fan above us, I felt love loosen its grip. I smiled at him, a real smile. He didn't question. "Did you eat?" I asked. He shook his head. "Not hungry." I nodded. "I'll make something light." And as I walked back into the kitchen, the receipt pressed against my thigh like a secret heartbeat, I understood something else, too. Some truths don't ask to be confronted. They ask to be carried, quietly, until the right moment. I slept that night with the receipt folded under my pillow, like a child hiding a diary. Not because I was afraid he'd find it, he never touched my side of the bed, but because I needed to feel it close, solid, undeniable. Every time I shifted, the paper whispered against the fabric, a reminder that what I'd seen was real. He slept easily. I could tell by the even rise and fall of his chest, the soft exhale through his nose. 17 years, and I still knew his sleeping sounds the way farmers know weather. That night, each breath felt like an insult. Not loud enough to wake me, but persistent enough to keep me from rest. By morning, I had decided something without fully admitting it to myself. I would not confront him. Not yet. That decision didn't come from weakness. It came from clarity. I needed to understand the shape of the lie before I touched it. I needed to see how long it had been living in our house, how many rooms it occupied. At breakfast, I moved through the motions like muscle memory. Toast, butter, his favorite mug, the chipped blue one he always reached for without looking. He thanked me, distracted, scrolling through his phone. "Busy day?" I asked. He nodded. "Meetings. Might be late again." There it was, the ease of it, the way the lie slid into place like it belonged. I watched him carefully then, the way a woman watches a man when she's trying to remember who he used to be. His hairline had crept back over the years. There were faint lines around his mouth I didn't remember from when we were younger, lines formed by repetition, by habits. When he left, I didn't clean the kitchen right away. I sat at the table with my hands wrapped around my mug, staring at the place where he'd been. The house felt different now, not hostile, just unfamiliar, like a hotel room you stayed in too many nights in a row. I took the receipt out of my pocket again. The hotel wasn't far, 10 minutes, maybe 15 from our home, close enough to be convenient, close enough to be cruel. The name printed beneath his wasn't someone I recognized, but that didn't comfort me. If anything, it made it worse. It meant this wasn't a brief slip with someone from the edge of our lives. It was deliberate. I folded the receipt carefully and placed it in an envelope. Then I put the envelope in my work bag beneath a stack of old notebooks and a cardigan. I wasn't sure why, only that it felt safer there than anywhere else. At work, I smiled too much. The secretary asked me if I'd changed my hair. One of the teachers joked about retirement plans. Life went on, oblivious, and part of me wanted to scream at the normalcy of it all. On my lunch break, I did something I had never done in all our years together. I followed him. I told myself I was only going to drive past his office, just to reassure myself, to confirm he'd been telling the truth about at least that part of his life. I parked across the street, heart steady, hands calm on the steering wheel. His car wasn't there. I waited 10 minutes, then 20. Still nothing. That was when the quiet inside me hardened into resolve. I didn't go to the hotel, not yet. I wasn't ready to see the proof in flesh and movement. I wasn't ready to see her, whoever she was. Instead, I went home. I moved through the house slowly, deliberately, like someone surveying a place for the last time. I opened drawers I hadn't opened in years, old receipts, warranty papers, a faded photo of us at a beach, sunburned and smiling, his arm slung carelessly around my shoulders. I stared at it longer than I should have. "Who were you then?" I whispered, feeling foolish for speaking to a photograph. In the late afternoon, I sat at the dining table with his laptop open. I had never touched it before. That had been one of our unspoken rules. Privacy, he called it. Respect. I'd honored that, thinking it was a sign of trust. Now it felt like negligence. The password came to me easily, our anniversary date. The irony didn't escape me. Emails opened like a confession he didn't know he'd written. Most were mundane, work threads, attachments, calendars. And then I saw it, an email chain archived but not deleted. Her name. The way it appeared on the screen made my stomach tighten, not with pain, but with recognition, not of her, but of the tone, familiar, intimate, casual in a way only repetition can achieve. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was perfect. I wish I didn't have to sneak around." I didn't read them all. I didn't need to. Each sentence landed gently but firmly, like a hand pressing me further into truth. This wasn't new. This wasn't an accident. This was a second life. When I closed the laptop, my reflection stared back at me in the dark screen. I looked older than I remembered. Tired, yes, but also alert, awake in a way I hadn't been for years. That evening, when he came home, I served dinner like I always did. Rice, lentils, something warm and forgiving. He ate with the appetite of a man unburdened. "You're quiet," he said. I shrugged lightly. "Just tired." He reached across the table and squeezed my hand, a familiar gesture that now felt rehearsed. "Let's plan something nice soon, make up for today." The audacity of it almost made me laugh. Instead, I nodded. That night, lying beside him again, I made a promise to myself. I would stay silent, but not still. The next few weeks unfolded with a precision that surprised even me. I paid closer attention. I noticed patterns I had ignored for years. Late meetings that always fell on the same days, phone calls taken outside, his sudden interest in cologne, the way he guarded his phone like it contained his pulse. And the hotel receipts kept coming. He wasn't careful, really. He relied on habit, on my predictability, on the assumption that I would never look. I began collecting them, not just receipts, evidence, dates, times, small details that stitched together into a tapestry of betrayal. I didn't tell anyone, not my sister, not my closest friend. The silence felt heavy, but it was also powerful. This secret was mine now, and I carried it differently than he carried his. Sometimes when he laughed at something on his phone, I wondered if it was her. Sometimes when he touched my shoulder in passing, I felt the echo of someone else's hand there first. I learned to breathe through it, to let the moment pass. I wasn't planning revenge in the way stories make it sound. There were no dramatic fantasies, no shouting matches rehearsed in the mirror. What I wanted was truth, public, undeniable truth. And for that, I needed time. The opportunity came quietly, as most things do. His company announced a formal dinner to celebrate a major contract, spouses invited. He mentioned it casually, as if it were an inconvenience. "You'll come, right?" he asked, already knowing I would. "Yes, of course." That night, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. I chose a dress he'd always liked. Not for him, for me. I wanted to walk into that room grounded, certain. At the venue, everything gleamed. Glassware, laughter, the hum of polished conversation. I played my role flawlessly, smiling, nodding, listening. And then I saw her. She stood near the bar, laughing with a group of colleagues. Her hand brushed his arm with familiarity when he leaned in to say something. It was subtle, almost invisible. Almost. I felt something settle into place then. Not anger, acceptance. When I approached them, he stiffened just a fraction of a second too late. "This is my wife," he said, voice steady. Her smile faltered, just enough. I extended my hand. "I've heard so much about you." She looked at him, then back at me. Confusion flickered across her face, followed by something else. Understanding. "Oh," she said softly. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of politenesses and carefully constructed distance, but something had shifted. I could feel it. The truth was no longer just mine. It was beginning to breathe. After that dinner, the house felt like it had learned a new language, one spoken in pauses and half-glances. He became attentive in a way that wasn't tender, only alert, like a man checking doors he was no longer sure were locked. I didn't mention the woman. I didn't need to. Her presence had lodged itself between us, invisible but solid. At night, when he turned toward me in bed, I could feel the question he didn't dare ask pressing against his breath. Did she know? What he didn't realize was that I had known for weeks, and that knowing had changed the way I moved through the world. I began to notice how often women like me are taught to mistake endurance for virtue, how silence is praised when it keeps things comfortable for everyone else. I had been good at that kind of silence, too good. But this silence was different. It was intentional. It was strategic. The following Saturday, I suggested we visit his mother. It wasn't unusual. She lived alone in a modest house that smelled of eucalyptus and old books, and she liked when we came together. Family, she called it, as if the word itself could protect us from fracture. He hesitated just a moment. "Today?" "Yes," I said gently. "She's been asking about us." That word again, us. At her house, I watched him closely, the way he laughed too loudly at her stories, the way he avoided my eye when she asked how work was going. I helped set the table, poured tea, played my part. At one point, his phone buzzed on the counter. He glanced at it quickly, then flipped it face down. His mother noticed. "Everything all right?" she asked. "Work," he said automatically. I smiled into my teacup. Later, while he helped her with a loose cabinet hinge, she pulled me aside. "You seem quiet," she said. Her voice was kind but sharp in the way of women who have lived long enough to recognize the signs. "Is my son treating you well?" I looked at her, this woman who had raised him, defended him, loved him fiercely, and I felt a strange tenderness, not for him, for her. "Yes," I said truthfully, "he's being himself." She nodded slowly, as if that answer carried more weight than I intended. On the drive home, he reached for my hand. I let him take it. His palm was damp. "You were wonderful tonight, as always." I didn't respond. That night, after he fell asleep, I went back to his laptop. This time, I wasn't looking for proof. I was looking for patterns. Her name appeared everywhere once I stopped pretending not to see it. calendar invites disguised as meetings, travel reimbursements that didn't match destinations, messages written with care, with intimacy, with plans. One message stopped me cold. "I can't keep doing this forever," she had written. "I hate lying." His reply came hours later. "I know, I just need more time." More time. I closed the laptop and sat in the dark, the glow of the streetlights seeping through the curtains. For the first time since finding the receipt, I cried. Not loudly, just enough to release the pressure behind my eyes. Not for the affair, for the years I had spent believing patience would be rewarded. The next phase of my life began quietly. I opened a separate bank account. I updated documents I hadn't looked at in years. I spoke to a lawyer recommended by a colleague, presenting my situation not as a woman wronged, but as a woman preparing. He didn't ask for details I wasn't ready to give. He only said, "You've done the hardest part already. You paid attention." At home, I remained steady, kind, familiar. I cooked his favorite meals. I asked about his day. I listened. And I waited. The opportunity came in the form of a weekend conference out of town. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. I told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually, as if daring me to object. He told me about it casually. After that cafe meeting, the world didn't end the way I once imagined it would. No thunder, no dramatic unraveling, just a quiet, steady shift, like furniture being moved out of a room you didn't realize had been too crowded to breathe in. He came home late that night, later than usual. I was sitting at the dining table, the same one where I had once planned celebrations he didn't want. A single lamp was on, casting a warm circle of light. I wasn't waiting for him. I was simply there. He stopped when he saw me, as if surprised that the house still contained me. "We need to talk," he said. I nodded. "Tomorrow?" He hesitated. "I don't know how much time I have." I looked at him then, really looked at him, and saw a man finally cornered by the truth he'd been postponing. "I gave you years," I said quietly. "You can give me a night." He slept on the couch. That was his choice. Or maybe it was instinct, an unspoken understanding that the space between us had become too wide to cross in the dark. The next morning, I moved through the house with intention. I packed his clothes into boxes, not violently, not angrily, carefully, the way you pack away something you once valued but no longer need. When he came downstairs and saw them by the door, his shoulders slumped. "You didn't even ask me to explain," he said. "I listened to your explanations for years," I replied. "I just didn't know that's what they were." He sat at the table, rubbing his temples. "I made a mistake." "No," I said gently. "You made a choice, over and over again." He looked up at me then, eyes wet. "Do you hate me?" I considered the question. It deserved honesty. "No, I don't feel much at all anymore." That seemed to hurt him more than anger ever could. He moved out that day, just a suitcase and a few boxes. The house felt cavernous afterward, every sound echoing. I opened windows, let fresh air in, let the silence rearrange itself. Within days, people began to notice. His mother called first. He must have told her something, a version at least. Her voice trembled when she spoke. "Is it true?" she asked. "Are you leaving him?" "I already have," I said. There was a long pause, then a sigh that carried years of maternal loyalty and disappointment. "I raised him better than this," she said. "I know," I replied. "So did I." She cried. I held the phone close, listening, offering comfort I hadn't expected to give. When she finally spoke again, her voice was firm. "You are always welcome in this family, no matter what happens." I thanked her, and when the call ended, I allowed myself a moment to grieve not just a marriage, but the people who had been attached to it. At work, the change was quieter but unmistakable. He had told someone, or maybe rumors simply move faster than truth. Colleagues began looking at me differently, not with pity, but with curiosity. One afternoon, a woman from accounting stopped me in the hallway. She said, "I heard what happened. If you need anything, I've been there." I nodded, grateful for the simplicity of her kindness. What surprised me most was how light I felt, not happy yet, but unburdened. The constant vigilance was gone. I no longer listened for keys in the door with dread or searched his face for honesty. I began sleeping better, eating better. I rearranged the living room, donated clothes I no longer recognized as mine. I planted herbs on the balcony, small green signs of continuity. The legal process moved forward steadily, no drama, no court theatrics, just paperwork, negotiations, signatures. He tried once to slow it down. "Maybe we should consider counseling," he said over the phone, "at least talk it through." "We've been talking for years," I replied. "You just weren't listening." When the divorce was finalized, I felt something close to relief, but not celebration. I didn't mark the day. I didn't tell many people. It felt too personal, too earned to be announced. The first real confrontation came unexpectedly. I ran into her at the grocery store. She froze when she saw me, hand tightening around her basket. I could have turned away. I could have spared us both the discomfort, but something in me wanted closure. "Hello," I said. "Hi," she replied, eyes searching mine. "I didn't know you shopped here." "I do now," I said lightly. We stood there, two women linked by a chapter neither of us had written alone. She ended it suddenly. "With him." I nodded. "I know." Her shoulders sagged. "I didn't know he would stay married. He kept saying he was going to tell you." "They all say that," I replied, not cruelly, just honestly. She swallowed. "I'm sorry." "I believe you," and I did. As I walked away, I realized something important. She was never my enemy. The betrayal had a name, and it wasn't hers. The months that followed were quiet in a good way. I learned how to live alone, not as abandonment, but as autonomy. I took long walks in the evenings. I cooked meals I liked without considering anyone else's preferences. I spent weekends reading, resting, rebuilding. One afternoon, as I sorted through old documents, I found the envelope where I'd first stored the hotel receipt. I held it for a long moment, then tore it into small pieces and dropped it into the trash. It had served its purpose. Revenge, I realized, doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like reclamation, like refusing to be diminished by someone else's dishonesty. One evening, months later, he called. "I just wanted to check in," he said, "see how you're doing." I thought about all the ways I could answer that question. "I'm well," I said finally. There was silence on the line. "I'm not," he admitted. "I'm sorry, and I meant it, but not enough to go back." After we hung up, I sat by the window and watched the city settle into night. Lights flickered on. Lives continued. I felt something then, not triumph, not bitterness, but peace, the kind that comes when you finally choose yourself. Life after the divorce didn't arrive all at once. It unfolded in small, almost unnoticeable adjustments, like learning a new walking pace after years of matching someone else's stride. At first, the mornings felt strange. No shared silence over breakfast, no second mug on the counter. I would catch myself reaching for his favorite tea before remembering I no longer needed to. The absence wasn't painful every time, but it was present, like a bruise you notice only when you press on it. I let myself feel it without judgment. Friends began inviting me out more. Lunches, walks, quiet dinners where no one asked too many questions. I learned to accept companionship without explanation, to enjoy laughter without guilt. One evening, my sister came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. We sat on the floor, backs against the couch, eating straight from the containers like we used to when we were younger. "You seem different," she said, studying me. "Different how?" "Lighter," she replied, "like you're not holding your breath anymore." I considered that. I think I forgot how much air I was missing. She reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you." The words settled warmly in my chest. Not long after, I received a message from his mother. "I hope you are well," it read. "I miss you." We met for tea a week later. She looked smaller somehow, older, as if the truth had rearranged her world too. "I won't ask you to forgive him," she said after a while. "That's not my place." "I appreciate that," I replied. She nodded. "But I want you to know you mattered. You still do." I thanked her. When we parted, she hugged me tightly. It felt like closure I hadn't realized I needed. At work, new responsibilities opened up. I took on a larger role, one I'd never pursued before because it required longer hours and more visibility. I surprised myself by enjoying it. Confidence, I learned, doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it grows quietly, fed by self-respect. One afternoon, while organizing files, I overheard two colleagues talking in hushed tones. "Did you hear?" one whispered, "about her husband?" I paused, then kept walking. Their voices faded behind me, powerless. The story no longer belonged to them. The final public consequence came unexpectedly, months after everything had settled. His company underwent restructuring, leadership changes, audits, the kind of professional reckoning that exposes not just numbers, but habits. He called me one evening, voice unsteady. "I thought you should hear it from me. I've been let go." I sat down slowly. "I'm sorry." "They found inconsistencies," he continued. "Expense reports, travel claims." I said nothing. "I never used company money for anything inappropriate," he added quickly, "but they didn't like the pattern." The pattern. I thought of the hotel receipts, the careful disguises, the lies built on routine. "I hope you find your footing," I said sincerely. When the call ended, I felt no satisfaction, just a quiet understanding of how truth, once released, tends to travel farther than we expect. A week later, a mutual acquaintance reached out. "I heard you handled everything with such grace. I don't know how you did it." I smiled to myself. Grace, I thought, is often mistaken for silence, but silence can be powerful when it's chosen. As the seasons changed, so did I. I took a solo trip for the first time in my life, just a small coastal town, nothing extravagant. I walked along the shore in the early mornings, the air sharp with salt, my thoughts loose and unguarded. One evening, sitting on a bench overlooking the water, I reflected on the day that had started it all. He had said, "No celebration." At the time, I thought he was denying me joy. Now I understood he had only delayed it. Because the celebration I eventually found wasn't loud. It didn't involve cake or candles or witnesses. It was internal, earned. It was the day I stopped loving a man who couldn't meet me in truth. It was the day I chose myself without apology. Back home, I began volunteering at a local community center, helping women navigate transitions of their own. Some were leaving marriages, some were rebuilding after loss. I didn't offer advice unless asked. I listened. Sometimes that was enough. One woman, younger than me, sat across the table one afternoon, eyes red from crying. "I found messages on his phone," she whispered. "I don't know what to do." I reached across and placed my hand over hers. "You don't have to decide today," I said, "but don't ignore what you know. It will wait for you, but it won't disappear." She nodded, tears spilling over. As she left, I felt a quiet sense of purpose, not because I had answers, but because I had walked the road and survived. Months later, on a quiet evening, I received a final message from him. "I hope you're happy." I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. "I am at peace." That was the truth. Not ecstatic, not untouched by memory, but whole. I blocked the number afterward, not out of anger, but closure. The house felt like mine now. Every corner held intention. Every silence felt chosen. I brewed tea and sat by the window, watching the world move without me needing to chase it. I thought about the woman I had been, the one who folded disappointment into drawers and called it patience. I wish I could reach back through time and tell her something simple. You were never wrong to want honesty. You were never weak for staying, and you are not cruel for leaving. The quiet that followed my decision to block his number was different from the silences I had known before. This one didn't ache. It didn't feel like something missing. It felt intentional, like closing a door gently and realizing the room behind you no longer defines where you're going. I began to understand how much of my life I had spent reacting, adjusting my moods, my plans, my expectations around someone else's choices. Without that constant recalibration, time felt wider. Days stretched in a way that allowed thought, rest, and curiosity to coexist. I started waking earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Morning light spilled into the living room, warming the floor where I'd sit with my tea. I noticed things I'd overlooked for years. The sound of birds arguing over crumbs on the balcony, the way the city exhaled before fully waking. I was learning how to be present again. One afternoon, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. It was his sister. "I hope it's okay that I called," she said cautiously. We'd never been close, but there was a shared history between us now, whether we liked it or not. "It's fine," I replied. She hesitated. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't know what was happening, not really." "I know," I said, and I did. There was a pause. "He's not doing well." I let the silence sit between us. "I'm not calling to ask you to fix anything," she added quickly. "I just thought you should know." "I appreciate that, but his healing isn't mine to manage anymore." She exhaled softly. "I understand." When the call ended, I felt a small but significant shift inside me, a confirmation. I had crossed a line that couldn't and shouldn't be crossed back. That night, I dreamed of our old house, but it looked different. The walls were bare, the rooms empty. Sunlight streamed through the windows unobstructed. When I woke, I didn't feel sad. I felt free. The public reckoning continued in subtle ways. At a neighborhood gathering, a modest thing with plastic chairs and mismatched plates, I noticed how people interacted with me now differently, not cautiously, respectfully. One woman leaned in as we chatted. "You handled everything with such dignity," she said. "I don't think I could have done the same." I smiled politely, but inside, I disagreed. You would have, I thought, if you had to. Strength often reveals itself only when there's no other option. Later that evening, as I helped clean up, I overheard someone mention his name, a lowered voice, a shake of the head. He really messed up, they said. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt detached, as if the story belonged to a past version of me, one I'd already laid to rest. One of the hardest moments came unexpectedly. I was sorting through old photos, deciding what to keep and what to let go, when I found a picture from early in our marriage. We were young, hopeful, standing in front of a modest apartment, keys in hand. I sat on the floor, the photo resting in my lap. We were real once, I whispered. Acknowledging that didn't weaken my resolve. It strengthened it, because honoring the truth of what was didn't require me to deny the truth of what became. I placed the photo in a small box, not to hide it, but to contextualize it. Some memories deserve a place, just not the whole room. As winter approached, I hosted my first gathering alone. Nothing elaborate, just a few friends, warm food, laughter that filled the space without effort. I cooked dishes I loved, not the ones I'd learned to perfect for someone else's approval. At one point, as I stood in the kitchen listening to conversations spill from the living room, I felt a sudden, overwhelming sense of gratitude, not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it forced upon me. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I sat amid half-empty glasses and plates, the quiet humming gently around me. I realized something profound. This was the celebration he had denied me, not the anniversary, not the ritual, but the reclamation of self. A few weeks later, I received an email from a woman I didn't recognize at first. Then I remembered her name, from the hotel receipt. She wrote carefully, respectfully. "I hope this doesn't intrude," the message began. "I wanted to tell you that I've left the city. I'm starting over. I'm sorry for my part in your pain." I read the email twice, then closed my laptop. I didn't reply, not because I was angry, but because I didn't need to. Forgiveness, I was learning, doesn't always require dialogue. Sometimes it's simply the decision to stop carrying what no longer belongs to you. The true measure of revenge revealed itself not in his loss, but in my growth. I enrolled in a course I'd been postponing for years. I updated my resume. I made plans that stretched beyond the boundaries of marriage. One evening, as I walked home from class, the city lights reflecting in puddles on the pavement, I felt a sense of alignment I hadn't known was possible. My life no longer felt like a compromise. It felt like authorship. There was one final encounter I hadn't anticipated. I ran into him outside a bookstore. The timing was cruelly coincidental. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, two people who knew each other's habits, silences, and weaknesses better than anyone else ever would. "You look well," he said quietly. "Thank you," I replied. "So do you." He nodded, hands shoved into his pockets. For a fleeting second, my eyes went there, to the place where it had all begun. He noticed and flinched. Some habits never fully disappear. I wanted to say, he stopped, searching for words. "I regret how I handled things." I studied his face. The lines were deeper now, earned. "I know," I said, "but regret doesn't rewrite history." "No, it doesn't," he agreed. We stood there, the past heavy, but no longer oppressive. "I hope you find what you're looking for," he said finally. "I already have." We parted without touching, without promises, without unfinished sentences. As I walked away, I felt the last thread loosen. That night, I wrote in my journal for the first time since everything had happened. I wrote about the woman I had been, the one who mistook silence for loyalty. I wrote about the woman I was becoming, the one who understood that truth, even when painful, is a form of love for oneself. And I wrote this sentence slowly, deliberately. The reason for my revenge was never what I did to him. It was what I gave back to myself. Healing did not arrive like a sunrise. There was no single morning where I woke up and felt fixed, no dramatic sense of completion. Instead, healing came the way old houses settle, quietly, gradually, with small creaks that only you notice if you're paying attention. Some days I still caught myself thinking of him, not with longing, but with curiosity, wondering how two people could share so much history and still end up strangers. On those days, I didn't scold myself. I let the thought pass through me like weather. I had learned that grief doesn't always mean you want something back. Sometimes it just means you are honoring what once mattered. I kept building my life carefully, deliberately. I paid attention to what made me feel steady instead of what distracted me from pain. Long walks, honest conversations, silence that didn't feel heavy. One afternoon, nearly a year after the day I found the truth in his pocket, I stood in the kitchen and realized something simple and startling. I was happy there. Not euphoric, not giddy, but content in a way that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. The kitchen still smelled like cardamom sometimes. I still owned the same mugs, but the space had changed because I had changed. It no longer held the tension of waiting for affection, for honesty, for effort. I had stopped waiting. The final piece of healing came unexpectedly, through an act so ordinary it almost felt insignificant. I hosted a small dinner on the same date as our anniversary, not to commemorate the marriage, to reclaim the day. I invited people who had seen me through the worst of it, not with advice, but with presence. We ate simply, we laughed easily. At one point, someone asked what we were celebrating. I paused, then said, "Truth." They nodded, as if that made perfect sense. Later that night, after everyone had gone, I washed the dishes slowly. Warm water, soft clinks of porcelain, the quiet hum of the refrigerator. It was peaceful. I realized then that this was what he had tried to take from me when he said no celebration. Not a party, but acknowledgement. And I had finally given it back to myself. People sometimes ask me now if I regret staying as long as I did. I always answer honestly, no. I stayed because I believed in commitment, because I valued stability, because I thought patience was a form of love. Those things were never wrong. They just weren't enough to survive dishonesty. What I regret, if regret is the right word, is not trusting myself sooner, not the staying, the doubting. I had known something was wrong long before I found that receipt. My body knew, my intuition whispered, but I had been taught, like so many women, to quiet that voice for the sake of harmony. Harmony built on silence is not peace, it's postponement. The last conversation I ever had about him came from a stranger. I was sitting in a waiting room, doctor's office, neutral territory, when a woman beside me struck up a conversation. Small talk, weather, appointments running late. She mentioned a man she'd recently started seeing. Her description stopped me cold. Same profession, same habits, same charm. I listened without interrupting, my chest calm but alert. When she finished, she smiled nervously. "Do you think that's a red flag?" I looked at her, not at her story, but at her courage in asking the question out loud. "I think," I said slowly, "that red flags aren't always about the other person. Sometimes they're invitations for us to listen to ourselves." She nodded, thoughtful. I didn't tell her my story. I didn't need to. On the anniversary of my divorce being finalized, I took myself out to dinner. A small restaurant, candlelit, quiet. I ordered exactly what I wanted without worrying whether someone else would enjoy it. As I lifted my glass of water, I caught my reflection in the window. I looked grounded. Not hardened, not closed, just whole. I thought back to the woman I had been, the one standing in the kitchen with a covered cake and a man walking out the door. I wish I could tell her what I know now, that the discovery would hurt, but it would also free her. That silence would become her strength before it became her boundary. That revenge would not come from destruction, but from dignity. And that the day she stopped loving her husband would be the day she finally started loving herself without condition. If you're listening to this and carrying a truth you haven't spoken yet, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't owe anyone your silence. You don't need permission to trust what you know, and you don't have to become cruel to reclaim your power. Sometimes the most devastating revenge is simply this: walking away with your integrity intact, building a life that no longer needs their absence explained, choosing peace over performance. That receipt I found in his pocket didn't just expose his betrayal, it exposed my own strength. And once I saw it, I could never unsee it. So I'll leave you with this question, the same way Auntie May always does, softly, honestly, without judgment. If you discovered the truth in their pocket, would you stay silent or would you choose yourself? Tell me in the comments. And if this story touched something in you, stay a while. You're not alone here.